Week 46, the promise of the Scriptures. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 15, we read the famous parable of the prodigal son. Jesus tells of the man who took the wealth bestowed on him by his father and squandered it in foreign lands, where he fell into evil ways. At last, repentant, he returned to his father's home. When his father saw him, he was, Jesus tells us, moved with compassion, and ran and fell upon his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee. I am no longer worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Fetch quickly the best robe and put it on him, and give him a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and bring out the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and make merry. Because this my son was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and is found. And they began to make merry. Small-hearted human beings, identified as they are with their little egos, give exaggerated importance to any slight they receive from others. Thus, they imagine God, like them, to be petty, unpardoning, and vindictive. In God's eyes, however, when human beings go astray, there is nothing to forgive. All of us are aspects only of his own self. He who made us resides in us. He is not far away from us in some far-off heaven. His call to us always is to return to our own home within. The way of return is described in the Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter. Supreme blessedness is that yogi's who has completely calmed his mind, controlled his ego-active tendencies, rajas, and purged himself of desire, thereby attaining oneness with Brahma, the infinite spirit. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
My name is Surendra. I'm here with Lorna and also with Bharati and Manisha, and we thank you for being with us this morning. Today's reading is one of my favorites. I think of all the stories in the Bible, there is none as hopeful or as encouraging as that of the prodigal son. This young man was about as wayward as a person could be, and returning to his family after having squandered his fortune, penniless, wretched, and yet repentant. His father greeted him, welcomed him, and celebrated his return with great joy. What we have here is more than just a parable. It's a divine promise. Our Father, Mother God, is standing by with a lot more than a precious ring and a fatted calf to welcome us home. And all we have to do is give up being attached to those things that simply cause us trouble in the first place. Our small-minded desires, our misguided ambitions, our guilt, regrets, our sufferings. You would think we would be eager to let these go, and yet something always seems to get in the way. I think they call it the ego. It's only natural, of course, that we would want to explore the ways of a worldly life. The world out there is a fascinating place with just stunning opportunities, alluring opportunities to seek and experience pleasure of all kinds, pleasures that come and go. But the question is, how long does it make sense to continue to pursue our worldly desires when the outcome is ultimately transient and by degrees disappointing, sometimes even depressing? The answer to that question is perhaps most disappointing of all. It points to thousands of incarnations that do not exactly support the claim that we are the most intelligent species on Earth. There's a funny old line from comedian Henny Youngman. In a twisted sort of way, it describes how we tend to dismiss what we don't want to hear when we don't want to hear it. He said, "When I read about the evils of drinking, I did what any intelligent person would do. I immediately gave up reading." He might just as well have said, "When I heard about the trouble with worldly desires, I immediately gave up listening." Surely we know by now that you cannot fulfill a worldly desire without strings attached. And that's because this planet is the planet of strings attached. The nature of duality, the dual nature of reality, runs the show. And what that means is that pleasure and pain are part of the same calculation. One offsets the other. And so ultimately, it's a no-win game. At the end of each lifetime, everything that we have acquired in the way of comfort, convenience, social status, material favor and advantage, all of that is unceremoniously stripped away. A month ago, I returned from a visit to old friends in Honolulu, where I lived for about 15 years up until 1990. And what I found is that it isn't quite the paradise that I remembered it to be at that time. Certainly the aloha spirit is still very much in evidence. It's lovely. But over the years, Honolulu's iconic splendor has given way to tall, glassy buildings that stretch along the waterfront for miles, and also it's given way to a great deal of traffic that often comes almost to gridlock. Honolulu today looks almost like a smaller version of Hong Kong. But what strikes me about that most of all is that it's typical of much of what we find in the Western world today. We take the beauty of a simple life, a life that has everything we need, and we add to it relentlessly with one desire after another, until we are overwhelmed by the complexity, the congestion, and the hectic pace of it all. We see some of that even here in the Portland area these days. The word prodigal means wasteful or recklessly self-indulgent. And it's sad to observe globally that prodigal is increasingly becoming a way of life. Americans in particular are driven by the quest for more. More money, more stuff, more status, more of what the rich and famous are rich and famous for. And the ultimate result is also more. It's more stress, more dissipation of our energy and our resources, and more discontent. You can feel it. The trap, of course, is that much of the time we actually get what we want, at least for a while. And we think that if it doesn't last, or when it doesn't last, that all we have to do is refine our approach just a little bit. We're ready to analyze what might have gone wrong and to make the necessary adjustments. What we see is that, well, maybe if such and such had or had not happened, I'd be a happy person. And so we try to finesse whatever that such and such is, and we do this again and again and again and again. No one thinks of himself as deluded, but almost no one isn't. We have the idea, for example, that if we just elect better politicians, peace and justice will prevail. That more technology or more laws or more law enforcement, that these are the answer. Answers like that are not an answer at all. They're subject to outward conditions which we have no control over. And those outward conditions are subject to the nature of duality, and when you have duality, you have the negative along with the positive every time. Asking for anything to last without losing its luster is perhaps, certainly a good definition for foolishness itself. But I believe the even greater mistake is failing to take full delight in all that is right and good with what we have when we have it for as long as it lasts. Happily ever after is a worldly myth, but lasting inner joy needs only our constant renewal of its constant availability. In this country, we have the so-called American dream. It's not a bad dream. At least not until we believe that it's the answer to our happiness, or until we drive ourselves a little crazy chasing after it. A lot of what we do in pursuit of self-gratification, it's simply exhausting. The society we live in is very effective at massaging and manipulating our desires. It tells us what to read, what to watch, what to buy, what to obey, even what to believe in order to have what we want. And we tend to say, well, that sounds pretty good. I'll give it a try. And then what generally happens is we experience a brief moment of whatever that pleasure or happiness is. It's like, hey, this is the life, which is soon followed by, well, I guess it wasn't. Another mistake we tend to make is believing there's a shortcut somewhere or a quick fix to what we want, having what we want. You see it in the myopia that drives large public corporations to put more of their resources into short-term quarterly profits than into long-range research and development. And you see it in the massive credit card debt that so many people accumulate in pursuit of a lifestyle that they couldn't afford if they had to pay as they go. But sooner or later, the prodigal son, whether it's a person or a corporation, winds up with a begging bowl instead of the riches that were sought. It's a simple matter of physics that you cannot reap more than you sow. James Barrie, who is the creator of Peter Pan, he made a very astute observation about our wayward ways. He said, life is a long lesson in humility. It's not surprising that far-sighted people, including Paramahansa Yogananda and Swami Kriyananda, have predicted hard times ahead. Looking around at what's going on in the world, international news, you don't have to be a prophet to understand why. There's a kind of prodigal madness out there that seems hell-bent for real trouble. Yet we who are here today, we who value the teachings of these great masters, can make a huge difference in our personal welfare and in the welfare of others, even as this gathering storm continues to gather. We can be beacons of light for a better, safer, more uplifting way to live. We're not perfect in our approach to the challenges that confront us, but we have each other. We have and share a sense of community, cooperative community. We value people over things. And we are generous. We believe, as Yogananda declared, that simple living and high thinking leads to the greatest happiness. We're here, for the most part, to rehabilitate that prodigal son that resides in us to some degree, in all of us. Swamiji counseled to practice before you have to. What little things that you no longer use or no longer need could you give away? What little acts of kindness and generosity can you go out of your way to extend to others? I realize that I'm talking to people who do these things already, but we can always do more. And the more we do, the greater the inner joy that we attract, the greater the peace that we experience. How do we attract abundance? We attract it by sharing the abundance we already have, whether it's great or small. In our Festival of Light, It's the little bird that mirrors the prodigal son, thinking to himself, what is wisdom if not to keep what is mine for myself? And soon he is beset with buffeting winds and lashing rains until he surrenders his selfish ways. Until then, he's condemned to a life of struggle and fear. Why is that? Because it's the law. It's the universal law. It's the karmic law of cause and effect. But it is also the law that when you make the effort to take positive change into your life, the entire universe conspires to assist you with increasing abundance in the form of whatever you need, and especially in the experience of increasing joy and love. Now that's a deal that beats any lottery jackpot any of us could hope to win, and you don't even have to buy a ticket. I'd say it's worth the effort, wouldn't you? I'd like to close with a reading from Whispers from Eternity, a short reading, one of Paramahansa Yogananda's prayer demands. It's the demand of thee as thy children, for that's what we are. We are God's children, prodigal or not. Thou art our Father. We are made in thine image. We are thy children. We neither ask nor pray as beggars, but demand of thee as thy children the gifts of wisdom, salvation, health, happiness, and eternal joy. Whether naughty or good, we are still thy children, all of us. Help us to perceive and understand inwardly thy will for us. Teach us the independent use of our human will, attuned to thy wisdom-guided will. Let's have just a moment of reflection, and we'll have some more music.
Home is a green hill, home is a